Imagine your next door neighbour buys themselves a brand new lawnmower. Now most people would react normally. Maybe you congratulate them, maybe you'd ignore them. But instead, imagine you spend the next couple of decades building the most advanced machines in human history, hiring hundreds of thousands of people, spending billions of dollars just to prove them wrong and get to the moon. Well, that's exactly what happened in the so-called space race. One of the greatest achievements in human history and one of the most expensive arguments ever. Today we're looking at how America and the Soviet Union became so competitive that humanity actually ended up on the moon. Our story begins in 1957. The Cold War was already underway. Now, despite the name, the Cold War wasn't a war in the traditional sense. America and the Soviet Union weren't directly fighting each other. They were competing against each other to see whose system would dominate the future. And both of them absolutely hated losing to the other. Until eventually the Soviet Union made the big first step. They launched Sputnik. Now, if you've never seen Sputnik before, you might be imagining some big spaceship. It wasn't though. It was basically just a massive metal ball with some antennae sticking out of it. That was pretty much it. But this little metal ball changed the world, because it was orbiting Earth, and every time it would go overhead it would send out a little signal. Beep, beep, beep. Now to us, this isn't frightening at all. But to America, this sound was basically a message from the Soviets saying, "We beat you." Immediately, this made the United States go into ultimate panic mode.
I'm having a fucking panic attack right now. I need to calm the fuck down because I'm having a panic attack.
Because if the Soviets could release a satellite into space that manages to orbit the entire planet, then maybe they could also launch some big nuclear missile that could do something along those lines as well. Classic America, thinking the worst. So suddenly, for the United States, this little metal ball which was making a few beeping sounds every once in a while became the most terrifying thing on Earth, or technically speaking, above Earth. And this started what's now known as the space race. However, the Soviets weren't finished, not even close, because just a month later they released Sputnik 2, very original name by the Soviets. But Sputnik 2 was different from Sputnik 1, because this time it contained a living animal, a dog. Her name was Laika. So now, not only had the Soviets been the first ones to actually reach space itself, but they had sent the first living animal or creature into space before America. This was a big no-no. Imagine being an American scientist in the year 1957 and you wake up one morning thinking, okay, the Soviets have beat us, they're now in space, but maybe we'll be the first to get people there. And now you're seeing that they're sending up dogs. At this point, it's safe to say that the Soviets were collecting achievements much like Pokemon cards. Meanwhile, America was desperately trying their best to catch up with the Soviets, but unfortunately their rockets had a habit of exploding upon launch, repeatedly. Safe to say that it wasn't going well for the Americans, at least right now. To put it this way, the Soviets were scoring goal after goal, while America was kicking the ball into their own fence. So pretty quickly, America realised we need to get a bit serious here. So about a year later, in 1958, America created what's now known as NASA. Now NASA wasn't just another government agency, it was now a national mission. The objective wasn't simply scientific discovery anymore, it was winning. It was about beating the Soviets. But somehow, only a few years later, things got even worse for America. Because in 1961, the Soviets achieved yet another first-timer. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space. Just think about that for a second. For all of human history, no one had ever left Earth, or even thought about it. And now suddenly, a Soviet pilot comes along, blasts off into space, and somehow comes back alive and well. The Soviets had won again. At this point, the scoreboard looked terrible, at least for America. First satellite in space, Soviets. First creature in space, Soviets. First human being in space, once again, the Soviet Union. America needed something huge, something so ambitious that no one, even the Soviets, had ever considered doing before. Until one day in May of 1961, President John F. Kennedy stepped forward and basically said, "We're going to the moon." That's all he had to say though. America had not yet actually figured out how that was going to happen. They just wanted to start a new race. The Soviets had now obviously won the race to space itself and successfully sending the first human being out there. But if America pushed the stakes by saying we're going to the moon, which is the furthest and, quite frankly, at this point in time, nearly an impossible task to pull off, it would essentially put them back in this race. Imagine you're working as a bricklayer on a construction site. One day your boss comes to site and just announces to everyone working there, hey guys, by Friday we have to build a city in Mexico. What? It's literally an impossible task, but for some reason JFK really wanted to stick it to the Soviets, and so this was really the only way that it would keep America in this so-called space race. But in a weird way, it kind of worked. The moon mission became one of the biggest missions in human history. So many people got involved, it was insane. There were scientists, technicians, astronauts, you name it. Entire industries worked towards a single goal, landing on the moon. And the amount of money involved was even more breathtaking. Billions upon billions of dollars. But it's okay because that's the taxpayers' money. And so what's really funny about this whole thing is if you simplify this entire story so far, it's essentially just America looking at saying the Soviets got to space first, we'll show them, and we'll get to the moon first. Yeah. Of course, getting to the moon wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't safe. One of the darkest moments came during the Apollo 1 mission. A small cabin fire started within the ship which killed the 3 astronauts piloting it. It was a true tragedy that had shocked the nation. And after this, people began asking questions of, is this worth it? Is it worth all this time and money just to win a race? Just to prove a point? And America went, yes, it is. And so the mission continued. The mission remained unchanged. The moon was still there, and the Soviets, whatever they were doing, could not be good for America. They needed to win. And that was more important than people dying. By the late 1960s, the space race was essentially at its climax. America began launching very ambitious missions, every launch getting them closer and closer to the moon. Until eventually came along Apollo 11. This was it, the mission that would decide everything. Years of effort, years of national pride, and years of competition had come down to this launch. Millions of people watched, the entire world was paying attention. 3 astronauts were carrying the hopes of nearly everyone on Earth on their backs. These 3 men were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. 3 names that would become legendary. On July 20th, 1969, history changed forever. Apollo 11 landed on the moon. For the first time in history, humans stood on another world. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and delivered one of the most iconic lines ever recorded. And just like that, America had effectively won. The space race was now officially over. After years of competition, billions upon billions of dollars, and countless setbacks, and enough fuel burned to make an environmentalist cry, America had done the impossible. Humanity had reached the moon. All because 2 global superpowers were trying to be better than the other. Who would have thought? But what I like to think about this story is that it's simultaneously amazing, inspiring, and absolutely ridiculous at the same time. It's of course inspiring because it clearly demonstrates what humankind can achieve when they all come together and focus on a set goal. But then it's ridiculous because it was essentially just one country saying, that country did a thing, so we're gonna do an even bigger thing. Imagine going back in time to the year 1800 and speaking to someone from that year and telling them that in about 150 years from now, we're gonna be walking on the moon and traveling around space. They think you're insane. But then wait until you explain to them why and how we managed to pull off this impossible task. You'd essentially have to say, we pulled it off because 2 massive countries were in a bit of an argument. Now they'd think you're completely insane, they'd probably report you to the local authorities for being a total maniac. Now, after all this money, time and success spent on the moon mission, you might have thought that people sat back and thought, good game everyone, well done. But no. Because human beings, being human beings, are physically incapable of doing that. And so recently, America have once again entered another space race to the moon, but this time against a new competitor, China.
China.
Because the last one no longer exists. Now, in fairness to China, they have done some pretty incredible things when it comes to space travel over the last few decades. They successfully sent astronauts into orbit, they built their own space station, and they've even landed robotic missions on the moon already. And so recently, when China announced that they wanted to do more exploration missions on the lunar surface with live astronauts, my response, and many other responses of normal people around the world, was, that's cool, good for you, China. You're exploring the moon. Let's go. Happy days. However, if you're America's competitive side, you would look at this and see that China's basically saying, we're going to the moon. And America's response to that was, oh really? Well then, so are we. And of course, the rest is history. New missions get announced, new rockets are being built, astronauts are being tested. We recently had a test not too long ago where some astronauts flew around the moon and came back to Earth. And supposedly the next mission, I believe, will actually land on the moon, which is set to happen in about 2 years' time from now. So we do have quite a bit of stuff to look forward to when it comes down to more stuff with the moon and the whole space travel season 2. Now, to be fair, even though I just made a few jokes about it, in today's day and age, a space race between United States and China wouldn't be anywhere near as competitive as it was back in the Cold War days. It wasn't like people were hiding in bunkers waiting for the other person to nuke them at any point in time. Well, most people anyway. But there's still plenty of national pride. And history has demonstrated many times that when humans get pretty competitive with one another and they really focus on one main goal, amazing things can happen because of this. We've heard that people want to build bases on the moon and explore more of the moon, and then we've got people like Elon Musk saying they want to build cities and move humanity to Mars. So extraordinary things will be happening within the next few decades. Or who knows, maybe we'll just spend the next 50 years arguing over who gets bragging rights. Wouldn't surprise me, anything's a possibility. Either way, I have to think that the moon is just sat up there looking at us people here on Earth and thinking, why is everyone so obsessed with me? After all, at the end of the day, it's just a fucking rock.